What if you could be trained to maneuver through a variety of environmental elements? And that's what LETN is all about, just like OSI. It's all about training.
Emergency response and recovery tracking operations.
Since we're talking about man tracking, we want to limit that to man-made sign. They're looking at an impression in the ground that is definitely a human footprint.
The shadow forms from the high spots to the low spots. Once that person starts moving quicker, that pace opens up. What allows us to see the tracks is the angle of the sun.
High-risk surveillance operations for law enforcement.
This is OSI's covert surveillance camera. It is completely self-contained and weatherproof. It's manufactured by Silent Witness.
This is a point from where the area recon begins.
Reconnaissance and land navigation for law enforcement operations.
Danger areas, any open area or a series of roads connected where you can be observed and seen easily.
We also offer customized seminars and training on related subjects in the use of tactical night vision equipment produced by ITT Night Vision. COBRAS, Close Quarter Battle Reconnaissance and Surveillance, a program centered around emergency response and recovery tracking operations. The absolute best law enforcement training in the world. Our team would like to thank our strategic partners for providing the COBRAS team with the finest gear and technology on the planet. Their commitment allows us to bring you the best training and certifications your money can buy. Our commitment is to build a bridge between law enforcement and cutting-edge technology. ITT Night Vision, custom concealment, Gilly technology, second to none. Nikon Sport Optics, Silent Witness, Electrophysics Corporation. To operate in the new millennium and to be prepared, you must be well trained. COBRAS means stealth, mission effectiveness, officer survival, life-saving skills, and a protected community. Don't miss it.
Okay, for many of you, the prospect of tracking a suspect in a rural area without the assistance of police dogs is not the ideal situation. But what if you could be trained to maneuver through a variety of environmental elements? That's one of the specialties offered by OSI Investigations and Consulting Group. Joining us on the phone is David Henderson. He's the director of OSI Special Investigations and Consulting. Good morning, David.
Hi, Elizabeth. How are you?
Good. David, tell us a little bit about your background in law enforcement, first of all.
Well, my degree, Bachelor of Science, came from the University of Louisville, Kentucky, in police administration. I'm a former Atlanta police officer. Worked mostly assignments related to gang intelligence and narcotics. Currently, I'm with the Fulton County Sheriff's Office, and I teach at the academy there. I'm assigned to the training group and teach at several of the regional academies as well.
Okay, great. Now, we want to talk about rural operations. Now, you talked about gangs and narcotics, and what most of us in law enforcement think is, you know, it's inner city, it's very urban, and we talked about this the other day. Talk about why in law enforcement we need to talk about rural operations. Where are the bad guys heading?
Well, Elizabeth, what we've been learning over the last probably 10 years or so is that many of the bad guy operations are beginning to move to the outlying areas. I just read a brief yesterday. As a matter of fact, it was a congressional briefing that was talking about that very problem, even with terroristic activity, moving from the urban areas to the outlying areas and into the rural areas.
David, why do you think that is?
I think the bad guys are realizing that in the larger cities, we have the capability to detect their operations and even make good qualified arrests, whereas they have realized many of the surrounding areas are not quite as well equipped, and they feel that they can hide their operations and operate more covertly.
Okay. Now, as a police officer, when I think about tracking in a case, I think, hey, call the police dog, right? We'll follow the dog, and the dog will find it.
Right.
But that's not exactly what you guys train. Tell us a little bit about your tracking training.
Well, tracking is really geared towards more of being able to respond in an emergency and recover both evidence and sign that will lead towards the tracking down of either a fugitive, gathering evidence for a crime scene. Tracking is not just about getting the canines out and tracking down a fugitive. When you teach an officer to track, you're really focusing on skills that are going to prepare that officer for duty, not just for tracking down fugitives. Canines, on the other hand, canine units are very, very effective. I have absolutely nothing bad to say. What we're trying to do, though, is trying to get canine units and trackers to work together. And by doing that, we can be so much more effective. There are limitations to dogs and there are limitations to man. And by combining those efforts, we can greatly enhance our operational effectiveness.
David, talk about how you train officers to think forensically when they're tracking, to think about evidence.
Well, anywhere that you step goes back to the basic principle of transference in crime scene investigation. Anytime you step on a piece of ground or you step on a plant or as you're moving through an area, you're transferring and picking up, and that's what we're looking for. We're trying to teach officers that forensically each step they take may be destroying critical evidence, and that's been seen in some of the recent cases of late.
Now, we talked about a couple of those recent cases. Talk a little bit about the Eric Rudolph case. Well,
in the Rudolph case, we're very familiar with many of the details of that case, and without being critical by any means, what we're trying to do is take information gathered and learn from that information, then apply it into an instructional mode so that officers can then take the information and again, become more operationally effective. In the Rudolph case, in the response particularly, there are some things that could have been done had the officers known how to properly respond with regards to tracking and some reconnaissance issues that would have greatly enhanced their ability to make an arrest initially.
Well, and that's what LETN is all about, just like OSI. It's all about training. It's all about what you're prepared to be able to do. Now, talk a little bit about surveillance. Again, growing up in a rural area and yet being a police officer in the city, when I think about surveillance, I think about sitting in a car, maybe sitting in an apartment. We have a lot of cover in urban areas. How do you conduct a surveillance in a rural, open land area?
Well, surveillance is an extremely underutilized tool for law enforcement. When I was with the City of Atlanta, we extensively used surveillance to gather information on narcotics operations and found it to be an extremely effective measure by which we could gather probable cause. And surveillance in rural areas and also what we call rural urban areas, that would be areas within a city that are like wooded lots or city parks and these types of areas. We can take those areas and utilize them for our benefit. We train officers to utilize technology to enhance their training abilities as well. It's one thing to have the knowledge of how to infiltrate an area, but you also need to have a good base of technology to support your efforts, and that would include night vision, optics that we train specifically, Nikon, sport optics. We use custom concealment ghillie suits, which are actually so effective they're regulated by the State Department. And so go ahead.
Talk about a ghillie suit a little bit. We talked about that before. Tell everybody a little bit about spending time in a ghillie suit.
Well, a ghillie suit is, the perception many times is that this is an aggressive, overt type of means that is used for intimidation, and that's just not the case at all. The ghillie is a very effective means of operating covertly in an area, and many times I have been in situations where I've had the bad guys literally walking nearly on top of me, but it gives the officer, it's an issue of officer survival. This is something that I guess law enforcement really needs to understand, that this is for the benefit of the community that we're doing this, and also the officer's survival. And those two issues are extremely important. The ghillie provides the officer an ability to gather information quietly and effectively, and it increases the officer's survivability rate, it increases their safety, and it also increases the accuracy of the information they're able to gather.
Absolutely. When you're conducting a surveillance, you want to be able to get in and get out safely, not just gather intelligence, but officer safety is always key. Now, we talked about reconnaissance and land navigation as part of rural operations. We were talking just before the show about situations that you have in the South. You still have revenuers, you still have people who operate illegal stills, and those are extremely, extremely dangerous situations for police officers. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Reconnaissance is a very effective tool, and our program is designed for reconnaissance for the law enforcement officer and team. Reconnaissance and land navigation are extremely important, as you say. I was just on the telephone the other day with a group from Kentucky, and they were explaining that meth labs are becoming a great problem for them again, and they really need this type of training to be able to get in effectively and profile an area. What reconnaissance for law enforcement does, this is not a search and destroy mission. This is a mission to get into the area, to profile the area, get information, and get out undetected. And you speak about stills. We do have those still in Georgia, and we still have revenuers, and their primary responsibility is to find and remove these stills, these illegal stills. And they are very, very dangerous, as you say, because they still booby trap these things. They also set up patrols, and it's quite a real problem for us in the South.
Absolutely. Now, also, when you talk about meth labs, there is hardly a more dangerous situation for a narcotics officer than a meth lab. And then when you factor in a rural situation, I can imagine that the officer's survival situation then becomes very critical. What about hidden marijuana fields? Is that something you train and talk about with your officers?
Absolutely. Marijuana is a real problem here as well. Also, I mentioned Kentucky. It's one of the foremost problems they have as well. Marijuana is a problem, though, all over. Our instructors have trained marijuana interdiction teams all the way from Hawaii to Florida. And that is an area where all of the classes, tracking, surveillance, reconnaissance, land navigation, they all come into play. We have a game warden who is an instructor for us on a part-time basis. He's one of the best and has been doing interdiction work for years, nearly 27 years. And he has found that tracking, that's how he got into it. He became a tracker and started realizing that the skills enhanced his ability to make solid arrests. And I don't even know to this day how many he has actually utilized tracking in, but the number is staggering.
Now, you talked a little bit about, you mentioned technology. Let's talk a little bit more about some of the technology that you train officers to utilize, some of the technology that's available, and then contrast that with some of the traditional methods that you still train in.
Okay, as far as technology, we are an exclusive trainer at this time for ITT night vision as it relates to tactical operations for law enforcement. Our instructors are certified tactical trainers for ITT, and we can train. When you come to, say, one of our reconnaissance classes, you will actually have the ability to utilize night vision, patrolling at night. We will teach and train and certify the officers as part of the class. It's kind of a golden nugget in the class, and teaching them the value of utilizing this type of technology is extremely important. It gives us an advantage, and once again goes back to officer survival and safety. When we can operate without the bad guys knowing that we're there, and when we can gather information safely and covertly, we are doing nothing but enhancing the officer's ability to survive and make an effective case.
Now, unfortunately, in law enforcement, oftentimes, David, it's all about budget. So for police departments and police officers that can't afford some of the latest technology, what are some of the things that you train in, some of the more traditional methods of utilizing things to be able to help you get your guy or make your surveillance a successful one? Well,
that would go back to observation skills. We actually teach several levels of observation skills, camouflage and concealment. We teach a lot of practical methodology that applies to these classes, and then by combining with these other technological advances that we've had. When you say budget, budget is an issue, but one of the things that we also can make available is that if an organization has a need, we can generally respond or have the manufacturer of these technologies supply for that operation, supply the technology to them on a needed basis.
Now, David, we're watching, as you're talking, some of the man-tracking footage. Now, one of the things that's come up recently is that police officers are looking more paramilitary, and you and I talked about that perhaps some of the things that officers are trained in your seminars might not be as politically correct as our communities would like it to be. How do you temper that in your seminars? What do you teach officers?
Well, what we are teaching and training and finding it to be effective is that we need to educate the community that it's not the appearance of the officer that is the issue. If officers are effectively operating, then the community isn't going to see them, and neither are the bad guys. That's a real critical, important issue. Matter of fact, I'm meeting with a congressman tomorrow on this very issue. We are trying to teach officers that they really need to use discretion when utilizing this type of gear. The technology, the techniques, the uniform, the dress is all designed for their survival. It's not an aggressive approach, and that comes out in a couple of the videos that we've produced on these topics.
Excellent. Now, David, we have just a few minutes left. Talk about the seminars that OSI offers.
Well, we offer a class in emergency response and recovery tracking. We offer high-risk surveillance operations for law enforcement, reconnaissance and land navigation for law enforcement. Then we do a 16-hour block of instruction. It's a 2-day post-certified class. It's called Special Operations Technology and Rural Intelligence Briefings, where we actually look at some of the incidents and look at some of the tactical issues that we have learned from these incidents, and then also we introduce to law enforcement and to the agents that are there what technology is available to you at this time.
Okay, and now you will also come in and do custom training, is that correct, for a particular agency?
That is correct. Yes, we just received a call 2 days ago, or 3 days ago, from an agency in the Midwest, and we will be working with their SRT, their state SRT team, and we will be tailoring a class specifically for them. There'll be some federal agents in that class, and it's tailor-made for the particular types of issues that they're dealing with.
I think that it's really important to mention that OSI will take care of certifying your seminar or your course in any state. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Most of our instructors are all post-certified instructors, so we write our lesson plans to post-certification standards for the Southeast. And those states that we don't have reciprocity with, then we will go through whatever measure is necessary to have that certified in the officer's state.
That's excellent, and we all hate paperwork. Now, you talked about you work quite a bit with game wardens and other state agencies. Who else do you work with? What other agencies do you train for?
Well, we train numerous agencies that are sheriff's departments, police departments. Our instructors have been involved in training everyone from the FBI to the ATF, drug interdiction teams. We also have been involved in training military special operations personnel.
Excellent. Now, David, how can an agency or an individual officer contact you and contact OSI?
Well, I guess a couple of the best ways to contact us, one would be through the website. And the website you can find at www.osinetwork. That's one word, osinetwork.com.
Okay, and what about by phone? How can they get a hold of you?
And we have an 800 number or an 888. It's 1-888-760-8587.
Okay.
We're located just outside of Atlanta.
All righty. Now, I have to mention that, in fact, you and I met and got to talking because of our own Caliber Press Street Survival seminars. And you are a big fan of street survival, and indeed you host them. Is that correct? Is that Fulton County that hosts?
Yes, it sure is. I'm a major with the Fulton County, and we do definitely host you guys and are absolutely proud to do so. You guys made a major difference in my life over 10 years ago when I first came to your seminar for the first time.
Oh, great. Now, if anybody would like more information about our Caliber Press Street Survival seminars, you can go to officernet.com, and there's a Caliber Press link, and you can click on that and find out our dates for the rest of 2000 and beyond. And we've made some excellent changes. Dave Smith is working this week with our lead instructors to continue to improve the Caliber Press Street Survival seminars. David, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us this morning. You and I have been going back and forth on the phone for several weeks, and I've enjoyed talking to you, and I hope to see you perhaps at the NSA in Kansas City.
We hope to be there. I appreciate it. Thank you, Elizabeth.
All right, David, take care.